the year 1872, the governor of the U.S. state of California, a man named Leland Stanford, would enlist the services of a well-known photographer of the time, a man named Edward Muybridge, to take pictures cataloging his most prized possessions, including his extravagant and lavish home, and most importantly, of his beloved racehorse named Occident. The latter request had been of particular interest to Governor Stanford, as he had grown skeptical of traditional artworks depicting galloping horses with both their front and rear legs in the air simultaneously and seemingly in sync. Governor Stanford would instead contend that horses move their front and rear limbs asymmetrically while galloping. However, this had previously been impossible to prove either way, as it's indiscernible to the human eye. However, he hoped that Edward would be able to capture a photo that would prove that he was in fact correct. Governor Stanford would be disappointed that after a day spent at the track, Edward had only been able to capture one rather poor quality picture that did seem to point towards validating his theory. This only redoubled his determination to prove that he was correct, and he would use his immense wealth to fund Edward's efforts to take more photos that would prove that he was correct. In 1878, Edward would develop a system consisting of 12 separate cameras that were rigged along the racetrack that were activated by a series of tripwires attached to an electromagnetic circuit. The negatives of the resulting captured images were then aligned and combined, and these photos would in fact irrefutably prove Governor Stanford's theory to be true. Substantially more significantly, however, Edward had in fact created the world's first motion picture and had subsequently ignited a whole new industry, the film industry. Motion pictures as a medium would emerge from its infancy years over the course of the following decade, and in August of 1889, the Eastman Kodak Company would revolutionize the budding industry of motion picture making when they would release the first ever flexible film stock. This new flexible film was able to be spooled into cylindrical containers, which allowed for a larger number of frames to be captured over a significantly extended time span, and would thus subsequently substantially simplify the process of creating motion pictures, allowing for more intricate films that also boasted longer runtimes. This new flexible film would prove to be so popular that in 1914, the Eastman Kodak Company would be ordered to pay its competitor Ansco $5 million as a result of losing a rather complicated patent infringement lawsuit that I'll spare you the details of, but I do think it's worth mentioning that $5 million in 1914 is the equivalent of over $157 million today. Needless to say, Kodak's flexible film stock set the market ablaze and fanned the flames of the beginnings of the growth of the modern film industry, as it would not only figuratively, but also quite literally set the film industry ablaze, and it was directly responsible for the loss of hundreds of lives, as well as the at times staggering mortality rate of working in the early modern film industry. What I've thus far neglected to mention about this revolutionary flexible film stock, though, is that the film's base, which is the photosensitive layer of the film stock, was made of a substance initially dubbed celluloid, otherwise known as nitrocellulose or cellulose nitrate. Notably, nitrocellulose is the first human-made plastic and is a rather volatile and highly flammable substance that is most commonly known today as gun cotton, as it initially found usage as the first substitute propellant for gunpowder within the firearms industry. Rather amusingly, in the latter half of the 1800s, nitrocellulose was also briefly used as a replacement for ivory billiards balls. However, the volatile nature of the substance made these balls prone to small, loud explosions when the balls collided, and this would draw the manufacturers of the balls a number of complaints from bar and saloon owners. These explosions would often lead to their patrons all drawing their guns upon mistaking the sound for gunshots. One particularly noteworthy aspect of nitrocellulose's volatility is that it is prone to spontaneous combustion, particularly while being stored for extended periods of time, as the substance degrades into an even more flammable powder, which greatly heightens the possibility of spontaneous combustion over time. If it does combust, the resulting fire is essentially impossible to extinguish with traditional firefighting means, which typically work upon the principle of starving the flames of their supply of oxygen. Burning nitrocellulose is so difficult to extinguish because they do not require an outside source of oxygen to continue burning, as they are fueled by the oxygen within nitrocellulose's molecular composition and will continue to burn underwater or after being completely smothered by a fire blanket. And attempts to extinguish nitrocellulose fires in these manners results in the emission of toxic gases. Nitrocellulose film, most commonly referred to as nitrate film, does indeed retain these aforementioned volatile properties, as a mishap as simple as the reel of film getting stuck in a projector or camera could and often would lead to loss of life, with such fires occurring at such a high frequency that accounting for films to spontaneously combust at any given moment continues to influence the design of movie theaters to this day. One adaptation to frequent nitrate film ignitions while projecting films was the adoption of a projectionist booth that was separated from the audience, as initially films were projected from within the same room as the audience members. However, when nitrate film fires would occur in theaters that projected their films in this manner, they would often result in high death tolls, as the dozens or sometimes hundreds of attendees within these theaters would be quickly incapacitated by toxic gases that would rapidly spread throughout the auditorium, or just as often, they would get caught up in deadly crowd crushes as the panicking moviegoers attempted to flee from the flames. One such fire that would claim nearly 50 lives would take place on September 5th, 1926, in the small town of Dromcollogher, Ireland, when a large barn that was serving as a makeshift movie theater would burst into flames after the nitrate film in the projector was accidentally set ablaze by the projectionist's candle they had been using as a light source, and combined with the flammable materials within the barn, the blaze quickly engulfed the structure and its occupants in a roaring inferno, and its interior was flooded with thick, toxic smoke within a matter of seconds. The intense inferno would completely incinerate the barn, completely eviscerating it, as it was nearly completely reduced to just ash. In total, 48 people would ultimately lose their lives in the blaze, and the tragedy has since been dubbed the Dromcollogher burning by locals in the years following. While the aforementioned incident was unique in the sense that it occurred in a barn, in fact, nitrate film fires were just as common within purpose-built movie theaters, and it soon became clear that isolating potential fires from general audiences was an industry necessity, which in turn would lead to the adaptation of the projection booth in theaters worldwide. Since ignited nitrate film is essentially impossible to extinguish, ideally, these projection booths were designed to contain the fire and the emitted toxic gases to within them. However, while this design philosophy was implemented to protect the safety of the audience in the event of a fire, the same could not be said for the safety of the film projectionists operating the equipment within these projection booths. As a career as a film projectionist during the early 20th century was a particularly perilous occupation with an, at times, simply staggeringly high mortality rate. Some of the most universally adapted methods of containing film fires to within projection booths were the adoption of airtight shutters that could be shut to prevent the escape of the noxious gases in the event of a fire. Furthermore, projection booths were commonly lined with asbestos due to its highly fire-resistant attributes, and projectionists were also further often equipped with a set of thick asbestos gloves as well, so that they could hopefully extinguish any small fires that occurred within the booth before they managed to spread any further. The implementation of these design elements would indeed prove to be effective at reducing the scale of the loss of life in the event of nitrate film fires. This was clearly evidenced in an incident which occurred in 1936 at the Palace Theater in Jackson, Mississippi, during the showing of a film to an audience numbering approximately 150 people. The film stock would experience a minor jam within the projector, which subsequently resulted in the film exploding within the projector and erupting into a deadly, rapidly spreading blaze. The projectionist on duty at the theater at the time was a man named Joseph Kuriger, who immediately recognized the gravity of the situation and rushed to close all the airtight shutters in the booth and further lock the doors to the room to prevent the toxic gases from escaping or incapacitating anyone who might try to open it while the fire was still burning itself out within the booth. Joseph's diligence and the quick, decisive actions that he took to protect the well-being of the theater's audience would ultimately cost him his own life, as after he had sealed the booth, he was trapped inside with the fire, and there was little he could do but accept his fate. Joseph's sacrifice was in fact not in vain, as the fire was successfully contained to within the booth, and Joseph was subsequently hailed as a hero for saving the lives of not only the 150 members of the audience, but also the lives of everyone else in the building as well, as no other injuries or deaths would occur during this incident. However, Joseph's tragic death would be far from the only casualty suffered by projectionists in the year 1936, as it was reported in the 1936 November issue of the International Projectionist magazine that 5 projectionist deaths had occurred that year over the span of just 90 days, which averages to 1 projectionist death every 18 days. Not all projectionists were as willing to sacrifice their own lives to save the lives of others as Joseph Kuriger had been, however, and thus some projection booths would begin to implement methods of containing nitrate film fires to within the booths that operated completely independently of the projectionist, which resulted in the installation of fireproof shutters on doors, windows, and other ventilation openings that were held in place by wax seals. The wax holding them in place would melt and slam the shutters down, thus sealing the fire and anyone or anything else inside the room in along with it. Due to the hazards and very real possibility of dying a horrific death locked inside an asbestos-lined room, doomed to perish from fumes billowing from the fire. By the late 1930s, there were few who sought out to become film projectionists, leaving only the most hardcore and dedicated projectionists to work out more effective solutions to these frequent and often lethal fires caused by nitrate film's volatility. One solution to this issue that had been implemented fairly early on was fireproof canisters to contain the actual film within, which by the late 1930s had become much more efficient in their designs, and fortunately, most nitrate film fires were successfully contained within them. At least, the newer nitrate films that had not decayed significantly, and as the link between older, decaying film stocks and a significantly higher frequency of fire occurrences became abundantly clear, this would incentivize movie theaters to begin to shelve films indefinitely after the film's first few runs in theaters, which would bring about the tradition of theater runs in movie theaters that is still practiced today, as before this, it was not uncommon for movie theaters to show films that had been released years beforehand. Around this same time period, however, another type of flexible film with a much safer and much less flammable cellulose acetate butyrate base would be introduced to the market, known colloquially as safety film. However, it was not adopted by the film industry, despite drastically reducing the risks involved with using nitrate film, as professional filmmakers would insist that the crisp black and white contrast achieved using nitrate film was far superior to the visual clarity of safety film, and thus safety film was relegated to amateur and personal usage at first. One of the first large-scale professional adoptions of safety film was by German filmmakers in the later years of World War II, as with German cities being constant targets for bombing runs, they realized that stockpiling or storing nitrate films was a recipe for disaster. Nitrate film would continue to be the professional industry standard throughout the 1940s and into the early 1950s, as filmmakers would be forced to make the switch to safety film in the year 1951 after Kodak discontinued production of nitrate film, bringing a close to a particularly deadly era of film's history. However, the film industry would continue to experience the repercussions of the usage of nitrate film throughout the following years, as every major US-based film studio would experience massive, sweeping fires at their film storage facilities, with the resulting fierce blazes caused by the chain ignition of decaying nitrate films that reduced these storage facilities to little more than ashes. And unfortunately, these frequent fires at storage facilities have resulted in many films becoming lost media, as industry experts estimate that only between 20 and 30% of films produced before 1930 still exist at all, as the remaining 70 to 80% have all gone up in flames. Thank you all for watching.